About time. On New Year's Day in Cornwall, the sea looked like dull pewter, and the house smelled faintly of toast and last night's champagne. Tim Lake woke with the particular ache that comes from having tried too hard to be charming. Downstairs, his father was waiting. James Lake had the gentle, distracted air of a man who could spend an entire afternoon happily losing to himself at table tennis. He sat in his study, oak shelves, mismatched armchairs, a view of the gray Atlantic, and poured Tim a glass of water as though they were about to discuss something only mildly inconvenient, like a parking ticket. "Sit down, my boy," he said. "There's something I should tell you. It's a family tradition. The men in this family can travel in time." Tim blinked. "Right. I'm not joking." There was a pause in which Tim weighed the possibility that this was some elaborate post-New Year's prank. Outside, a gull shrieked. "You go into a dark place," James continued, patient as a tutor explaining algebra. "Clench your fists and think of a moment you've already lived. You can't go to the dinosaurs, but you can go back to, say, last night." Tim laughed because what else do you do? Then he went upstairs, into the wardrobe between moth-eaten coats, squeezed his eyes shut and thought of the party. The wardrobe door opened onto last night. The house was full of fairy lights and lukewarm Prosecco again. His sister Catherine, Kit Kat to everyone, was dancing badly with Uncle Desmond. Mary, their mother, drifted through the room with a bowl of crisps and a smile that suggested she had long ago given up expecting men to behave sensibly. Tim stood there stunned. Then the clock struck midnight again. He tried a few small corrections, fewer jokes about politics, no attempt at a dramatic New Year's kiss with a girl who clearly preferred his friend Jay. He found himself more relaxed the second time. When midnight came, he kissed no one. It was, objectively, a better evening. Back in the present, James listened to his report like a scientist whose experiment had just worked. "You mustn't use it for money or fame," James said firmly. "We tried that once. It's boring. Aim for something better." "Like what?" James smiled. "Love." The following summer, Charlotte arrived like a weather system. She was Kit Kat's friend from university, sun-browned, clever-eyed, and the sort of beautiful that made Tim temporarily forget how verbs worked. She stayed for the holidays, occupying the spare room and, as far as Tim was concerned, the entire atmosphere of the house. They swam in the cold sea, played ridiculous lawn games, and stayed up talking until the small hours. Charlotte would sit cross-legged on the kitchen counter, drinking wine, teasing him. "So, Tim," she said one night, "what's your big plan?" "Become a lawyer," he replied. "Save the world through paperwork." She grinned, sexy. He waited. Of course he waited. He waited for the perfect moment, the cinematic moment, the final evening of her stay when the air would shimmer and destiny would applaud. On her last night under a sky thick with stars, Tim finally said it. "I'm in love with you." Charlotte looked at him with a softness that was not love. "Oh, Tim, you should have told me earlier." The words landed like a verdict. In the wardrobe, fists clenched, Tim went back to the middle of the summer. He found her in the garden, hair still wet from the sea. "I'm in love with you," he blurted. Charlotte tilted her head. "You're sweet, but you should tell me on the last day. That's when these things are supposed to happen." He tried again on another day, and another. Each time the answer was some gentle variation of no. Eventually he stood alone in the wardrobe, breathing hard, and understood the brutal rule. Time travel could fix timing but not feeling. You could not engineer someone into loving you. That autumn, Tim left London for a job at a legal firm. He rented a room from his father's old friend Harry, a playwright whose flat was stacked high with manuscripts and mild despair. Harry wore scarves indoors and spoke of theater the way priests speak of God. "It's opening night next week," he told Tim. "My masterpiece, my legacy." Tim nodded. still learning how to navigate the underground without looking permanently lost. One evening, craving novelty, Tim went to Dan's Le Noir, where diners ate in complete darkness. He was led to a table by a blind waiter, seated opposite a stranger. "Hello," said a woman's voice, American, warm, amused. "Hi," Tim said into the dark. Without sight, conversation felt oddly honest. They talked about books and bad dates and the terror of adulthood. She told him her name was Mary and that she worked for a publisher. He told her about Cornwall and his improbable family. "I like your laugh," she said at one point. "I like your voice," he replied, then winced at his own inadequacy. When the lights finally came on, Mary was even more lovely than his imagination had dared. Dark hair, serious eyes that broke easily into laughter. They stood awkwardly by the door. "Can I?" Tim began. "Yes," she said, and pressed a scrap of paper into his hand. "Call me." He floated home, clutching the number like a relic. Harry was packing the living room. "It's a disaster," he cried. "The lead forgot his lines, my play ruined, years of work." Tim hesitated. He could see the evening folding in on itself, Mary's number in his pocket, Harry's devastation in front of him. "I might be able to help," Tim said slowly. Back in time he went, slipping into the theater before the performance. He befriended the nervous actor, prompting him from the wings, whispering forgotten lines in the dark. The play was a triumph. Harry wept into his scarf. Triumph lasted exactly until Tim reached into his pocket. No scrap of paper. He hurried back to the restaurant. They had no record of Mary. By changing the timing of the evening, he had erased her. For a day he wandered London in a quiet panic. Then he remembered something Mary had said in the dark. She loved Kate Moss. A photography exhibition featuring Kate Moss had just opened. Tim went and went again and again. On the third day, he saw her standing before a black and white portrait, brow furrowed in aesthetic concentration. He approached cautiously. "You know," he said, "I once had dinner in the dark with a woman who adored Kate Moss." Mary turned, puzzled. "That's specific." He introduced himself. She did not remember him, of course, but she was kind enough to let him join her and her friend for coffee. At lunch, Tim learned she had a boyfriend. He smiled through it, then excused himself and went to the gents. In the dark cubicle, fists clenched, he traveled back to the exhibition's opening moment. This time, he intercepted her before the boyfriend arrived. "I know this sounds mad," he said, heart hammering. "But if you don't leave with me right now, you'll end up with someone who isn't me." Mary stared at him, then laughed. "That's either the most arrogant or most romantic thing I've ever heard." "Romantic," he offered. She considered him, really considered him, and then said, "Okay, let's risk it." Their love grew in ordinary increments. Burnt toast, shared umbrellas, arguments about which side of the bed belonged to whom. Tim moved into Mary's flat. They made a life stitched together by jokes and quiet mornings. One night at a friend's party, Charlotte reappeared, older, sharper, a little regret in her smile. "You look happy," she said, fingers brushing his arm. "I am." "We could have had fun," she murmured. For a flicker of a second, Tim imagined a different path. Then he saw Mary across the room, laughing, and the decision felt easy. "I'm in love with someone else," he said gently. Charlotte nodded. "About time." He went home that night and, on a windswept beach in Cornwall, asked Mary to marry him. Their wedding was chaos, rain lashing sideways, guests sprinting across sodden grass, but it was perfect in its imperfection. Soon after, Mary gave birth to a daughter with solemn eyes and a furious cry. They named her Posy. On Posy's first birthday, Kit Kat arrived late and drunk. Her career had stalled, her relationship was a mess. She laughed too loudly, hugged too tightly. That night driving home, she crashed her car. The phone call came at 2 a.m. Tim went to the wardrobe. He found her earlier that evening, gently redirected her away from the disastrous boyfriend, kept her home. The crash never happened. Back in the present, Mary handed him their baby. It was a boy. The room tilted. James listened carefully when Tim explained. "If you change something before a child is conceived," he said softly, "you may change which child is born. It's unpredictable." Tim went back again, let the crash occur. Posey returned to them, furious and perfect. This time, instead of rewriting Kit Kat's life, they sat with her in the aftermath. Mary held her while she cried. Jay, steady, kind Jay, began to visit more often. Slowly, Kit Kat stitched herself back together. Tim and Mary had another child, a boy. Laughter added to the house like another instrument in an orchestra. Then James told Tim about the cancer. "Lung," he said lightly, as though discussing the weather. "Comes from all those cigarettes. Time travel won't help. If I go back and stop smoking, you and Kit Kat might not exist." He had known for a while. He had been revisiting good days, small ones, a beach walk, a table tennis match. "I've had a wonderful life," he said, "but here's my advice. Live every day twice. The first time with all the worry and distraction, the second time noticing the details." Tim tried it. He relived an ordinary Tuesday, the chaos of breakfast, the irritation of a delayed train, the quiet beauty of sunlight on brick. The second time he savored it. The way Mary tucked her hair behind her ear, Posey's sticky hand in his. When James died, the house in Cornwall felt too large. On the day of the funeral, Tim slipped away to the wardrobe. He found his father on a beach from his childhood, both of them younger. They played table tennis in the fading light. "No more trips after this," James said gently. "It's time." Mary later told Tim she wanted a third child. He hesitated. Another child would mean no more visits to his father. Traveling back beyond the birth would risk losing the new baby. He told James. Together, one last time, they returned to a memory of Tim as a small boy running along the shore. They did not change a thing. They simply walked beside him, memorizing the wind. Mary gave birth to another daughter. Jay and Kit Kat, radiant and stable, had a child of their own. The family learned to carry James's absence like a scar, tender but survivable. And gradually, Tim stopped going back. He realized that living each day twice was unnecessary. If you paid attention, really paid attention, the first time was enough. So he stopped using the wardrobe. He walked through his life, through spilled cereal and legal briefs, through Mary's laughter and his children's shrieks, as though it were already precious memory. As though this moment, ordinary and imperfect, was the second chance.